Welcome to The Book of Life, a show about Jewish books, music, film, and web. I'm Heidi Estrin. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida. Additional support comes from the Association of Jewish Libraries. Marc Tyler Nobleman is the author of Boys of Steel, the creators of Superman. I met with him at Temple Beth Am in Miami to talk about Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, the Jewish writer and artist who came up with Superman, and to discover Marc's secret identity as biographer and defender of the underdog. So I'm here with Marc Tyler Nobleman at Temple Beth Am in Miami, where you just gave a very interesting talk for the general community. Tell us a little bit about your book, Boys of Steel, that you came here to talk about.
Boys of Steel, the creators of Superman, is an all-ages picture book that came out in 2008. It is the first standalone biography of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who were the creators of the world's first superhero. They've been parts of larger comics histories, of course, but they've never had their own book, which is staggering when you think about Superman's influence and how widespread he is. And I thought it would be a perfect format to tell this story because I wanted to include, it's aimed at children really, but it's written in a way that adults will also be interested, and there's an afterword that is written more for the older reader that talks about some of the more sophisticated sides of the story.
The dust jacket of this book includes a photo of you at age 12 in a Superman costume. What were you like as a kid, and how did you get bitten so hard by the superhero bug?
Well, I was definitely a superhero kid, and so strongly that it never left, really. My first memory is watching Superman the movie in 1978 in my pajamas in the front row of my little hometown theater, and then coming home and saying, I want anything Superman. So my dad brought me a Superman comic. That's the order that I remember it in. I'm not sure, though, because we don't really always know if our memories are accurate, but that's what I remember. And I was always a hardcore reader, not just of comics, but that was a big part of it. And I have friends that I haven't seen for 20 years that I'll see at a reunion or something, and that's what they remember about me. So I guess that was my defining characteristic. And I've now, I hope, put all that to some use. It's become a part of my career.
Uh-huh. And I liked the other slides you showed in your talk today of the various Halloween costumes you've had of Superman and of Robin.
Yes. I dressed up a lot.
Aquaman?
Aquaman. Yeah. That wasn't a Halloween costume in my defense.
Right.
That was just underoos. Right. That never left the house. But yes, there was Superman 3 times, and Robin was twice, and then one other time just as a kid in the backyard, and probably others that I don't have photos of.
Okay. Were you ever something other than a superhero?
Yes,
Halloween?
I was. I can actually name all of my costumes.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, let me start with, I think, first grade I don't remember, but second grade was Superman, third grade was a Martian, fourth grade was the Frankenstein monster, fifth grade was a scarecrow, sixth grade was a knight, seventh grade was Superman again, eighth grade was a mad scientist, ninth grade was Superman again, actually Clark Kent, and then I had to stop because Robin was 10th grade, then I stopped.
Okay. Then you were too old for them to give you candy, so.
Yeah, that, and also that you can look good in tights when you're young, not as a real life adult. So. Then I stopped.
Yeah, I liked the photo of you as Clark Kent with the Superman T-shirt peeking out from underneath.
Right. That's how a high schooler does.
Very big 80s glasses.
Oh, they were super big. And those were probably my real former glasses that I took the lenses. I don't remember. But yeah, I was not cool, but in my mind I was too cool to dress up like Superman because that's a risk when you're in high school to come in something skin tight. So I was Clark Kent.
That was a good solution.
Yeah, it worked well for me.
The illustrations for this book, I thought, were a perfect fit. Do you agree?
Yeah, we were lucky to get Ross McDonald. He is widely known for magazine work. He does lots of work for Vanity Fair and New York Times Book Review and that sort of thing. I'm not sure about that, but definitely Vanity Fair. Mm-hmm. And he's done a few children's books too, but he's great because he has a very Art Deco style. He didn't change his style for the book. Some people think that he's trying to copy Joe Shuster, but that's just his style. Mm-hmm. And he had a real love for the material, which I think you can tell because his work is very vibrant. And I really love that he doesn't have a comics background. Not him specifically, but the artist that we got was not a known comics guy because what I'm trying to do is validate this story, not that it needs my help, but to a larger audience to say this is not just a story for comics people. This is just a good story that you might be interested in even if you've never read a comic book.
Did you have any influence in helping to choose him as the artist for the book?
I did. You don't always.
Right.
You don't get final say, as you know, unless you're a big name. But they respected how passionate I was about this, and they let me give them a list of who I would like, and they had a list of people they wanted to suggest, and Ross was someone that we both agreed on, and he was available and interested, so it worked out.
You talked in your lecture today about some of the Easter eggs, as they call them, in the illustrations. Can you talk about that?
Yes, as I was writing it, there were things that I put into the work, knowing that it wouldn't be explicitly discussed, but that I would be able to talk about later, hopefully. And just to give one example, there is a scene of Jerry working at his attic window. Jerry was the writer, and for all anybody knows, that window could look like any. I mean, there's no one who's going to know what that window really looked like. But I wanted it to be authentic, so I went to the house in Cleveland that Jerry grew up in, which is still standing. It's a private home, and I was able to get inside. They let me in so that I could take photos and give those photos to the illustrator. So it doesn't say that in the book, but I can now point it out when I'm speaking that this is what it really looked like, and then I can show the photo that I took to compare, and people seem to get a kick out of that. That
actually leads to this other question I had for you. On your blog, Noblemania, which is a great name for a blog, by the way.
Thank you.
You talk about doing original research for your writing. So first I wanted to ask you to define original research to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about, and then explain why it's so important to do original research when you're writing nonfiction.
Original research, by that I mean you're doing research that no one else has ever done. So original research is not just looking through 6 other books and 3 websites and writing a book based on that. It's talking to people that have never been interviewed before about this subject. It's going to documents that might be hard to find, but finding them and using information from those documents in your work. Those are the 2 main components of it. It's not to say that books that don't use original research are not as good. I mean, there are some subjects that, frankly, might not need it. I mean, there's always a way to find good new information. Not always. There's always should be always an incentive to look for it, but you might not need it. For someone, for example, like Rosa Parks, who lived her whole life very well documented, and I wrote a book about her, not like this, but a book for a more school and library approach to the subject. I wasn't expected to find out any new, startling new facts about her. There probably isn't much because she's been so well covered. Mm-hmm. But for something like Superman, which is well known but hasn't been done in this way, I just took it as a challenge to find out information that hadn't been published before. And I think it's really important for young people to know what this means because I don't know how much of this happens these days, but when I grew up, you do research, you have 3 sources, which are an encyclopedia, which is not going to give you an in-depth look at anything, and then 1 or 2 other books, and that's what we were taught to do. And of course, when you're 10, you're not expected to go to the Office of Vital Records in New York City to find out things, but you should know that there's more to research than just these very general books and the internet.
Right. In your talk today, you gave a really interesting example about how some of your original research actually corrected a myth that was being spread through various books. So can you talk about that?
Yes. There were 2, and the first was that Jerry Siegel's father Jerry never mentioned him in interviews, nothing that I ever saw, and I think I've seen it all. And a book came out in 2004, right around the time I'd sold Boys of Steel, actually, and the book was saying that Jerry Siegel's father was shot to death during a robbery of his secondhand clothing store in Cleveland during the Great Depression. And this was actually had a somewhat big effect in the comics community because this is the biggest character and this is a creator that people knew something about, but not everything. And that people thought this was the lost key to something, that this might have had something to do with the creation of Superman. And just the fact that it was finally coming out with something about his family that we never knew. So that I just took as faith. I took it as gospel. And I went to Cleveland to do research, and I found an obituary for Michael Siegel, Jerry's father, in which it said he died of a heart attack. So my first thought was, how could that obituary get it wrong if it came out a day or 2 after the incident? I just was not thinking right, and this is another going back to original research. And then I had to just reverse my thinking and realize, okay, no, it's not the obituary that's wrong, it's the book that came out 65 years later that's wrong. And people make mistakes. So it turns out that he did die of a heart attack, and some of the family was told that he was shot for reasons that haven't been documented. But I have my theory. But So now that minor, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, that's a minor detail.
Right.
But in Superman lore, that to me, that's a big deal to know that his father wasn't murdered, that
Right.
he did die during a crime, which is tragic, but he wasn't killed. He had a heart
And it
attack.
was interesting that you were able to find, you showed us slides of the coroner's report, the death certificate.
Yeah.
So
And the
your
police
research,
report.
right, the police
Yeah.
report. So your research really found out the facts
Yes.
rather than perpetuating a myth.
Right, and
Yeah.
I found the obituary would have been enough for most people, but I like to get as much as possible, and it's just nice to have that as the backup, and also because you might learn something from them that even obviously the obituary wouldn't have. So it's the more you can get, the more chance you have for something really new and cool.
Yeah, that is cool. In the text, you never really used the word Superman. So why not? Is it a copyright issue or?
No, in fact, I like when people notice that or bring that up. In the story proper, which is about 1,500 words, I don't use the word Superman at all. The only time it appears is in the subtitle. And then in the afterword, which is text only, it's for an older audience, I do use the word there. But in the story itself that you read, not a single time. And the reason was I didn't set out to do that at the beginning, but I was writing the book, and I got to this. The book starts off with Jerry and Joe right before they meet, essentially. And it ends with Superman becoming popular. So it's only 10 years that the book is looking at. It's about 1930 to 1940. It doesn't tell a birth-to-death comprehensive story. That's the beauty of modern biography. You can take liberties with the narration and the chronology, and you can tell it in a more creative way. So basically, Superman is created at the end of my version of it. Mm-hmm. So if I got that far without using the word Superman, I just took it as a little challenge to see if I could finish the book without using the word Superman. And I did, and no one noticed this. And then when I ask for, usually I do it with kids, I'll say, how many times do you think the word Superman was in this book? And they'll say, 1,000 or 47. I mean, they just shout out all.
Numbers.
But no one ever says 0.
Huh. Yeah, I wondered if there was some, technical reason that you weren't allowed to say.
No, in fact, my editor frankly thought it was stupid. She said, why is this so important to you? That's so arbitrary and dumb.
See if you could.
And I said, if there's something that reads clumsily because of it, then I'm open to reconsidering. But it worked.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you can read the last 4 or 5 pages after they actually create him, and you don't notice that it's not there. It's also the beauty of the picture book. It's really what you're supposed to do, is you're supposed to create a text where a work where the text and the art are symbiotic, where if you remove one, it doesn't work. It has to be something that they go together. So in this case, you do know that it's Superman because you show it. You don't read it. And that's really what you can take full advantage of with the picture book format.
Was there any copyright issue in terms of portraying Superman in the illustrations?
There is. I wasn't directly involved with that. Random House's lawyers dealt with that, but there was a preliminary screening before they bought the book. They told me, we have to see if we're going to be able to do this, and they did it with their lawyers, and it turned out to be okay. Basically, we can't use Superman on every page. There's something called fair use, which prescribes that you can use a certain number of licensed characters, images in your work for no penalty or no fee and so forth, but it's not clearly defined what that is, so anything can be disputed. The book's about 40 pages. I think we show Superman 3 or 4 times. It didn't prove to be problematic. DC never raised a hand about it. And we're going to have the same issue with the Batman book, just to make sure, we've already done it, to make sure that we stick within a very limited, only when absolutely necessary do you show the characters, but you can write whatever you want with no,
Okay. This is not an explicitly Jewish book, but here we are at Temple Beth Am, and Jerry and Joe were Jewish, the creators of Superman, and this book was named a notable book by the Association of Jewish Libraries back when it came out. So other than Jewish pride, and we always like to say, oh, these famous people were members of the tribe, besides that, is it significant that Jerry and Joe were Jewish? And is Superman Jewish in some way?
Good questions. Not the first time I've talked about this, but the reason that I do get invited to speak in synagogues and JCCs is because, yes, the book is not explicitly Jewish. In fact, it doesn't mention their Judaism at all in the story proper. I just show Shabbat candles in one scene. But in the afterword, I address 2 or 3 things about their Judaism which I feel are significant. One is Superman's Kryptonian name, which is Kal-El, which in Hebrew can be translated to mean all that is God. And it's just funny to speculate about the consciousness of that. Did they know what that meant, or were they just lifting this sound from their Sunday school or their Hebrew school days and using it, not really thinking about the meaning? We don't know because they never said, and unfortunately we can't ask them now. And then I mentioned the Shabbat candles and the little anecdote that Joe would draw on his mother's breadboard. That's where what his surface was in their little apartment, and so he couldn't use it on Thursday nights because she needed it to make the challah. That was the one night he couldn't draw, apparently. And then what I thought was most significant was something that another myth that was debunked that you asked about before I was going to tell the second one. That's about Hitler. There's a reoccurring story in Superman academia, if you call it that Hitler banned Superman personally on the floor of the Reichstag. And big names were repeating this. So I asked them all where they got this, and nobody had a source. So it turned out to be sort of apocrypha. No one knew exactly where this came from. And through another person that had already done some research on this, I pieced together, I agree with his theory, that there was a series of smaller incidents that might have led someone to eventually exaggerate and say Hitler banned Superman, when in fact it was really just a fairly small thing, which was a Nazi newspaper that wrote a disparaging article about Jerry Siegel, and basically just the fact that he was Jewish. It had nothing to do with him as a person because they didn't know him. So these are the 3 or 4 Jewish elements that the book does address, even though most of them are in the afterword. But it's enough to, I think, create interest in the Jewish community beyond what you said that, okay, here are people that created something that are Jewish, and does the Jewishness inform their work or not? And, in this case, I'm very honest with groups when I say, we don't know. I can't say for sure. I've had some audiences where 1 or 2 people gets indignant that they say, how could you not say that it was a Jewish influence? Look what you're telling us. And I say, I'm not saying it's not. I just can't say for sure that it is. Mm-hmm. But I'm telling you everything I do know. And now, as far as was Superman Jewish, I mean, there are articles that say Superman is a Christ figure, but then there are also articles that say Superman is a Moses figure. I think when you get as iconic as Superman, there's going to be both sides of it. I mean, Tom Sawyer and all, big Harry Potter, all these big fictional characters. There's always, when they become so iconic, you can pretty much relate them to anything. I personally think that Superman is just beyond religion. There's no religion. I mean, he's not a human being. Mm-hmm. So, he's egalitarian. He would welcome all the things. I don't find things in him that are particularly Jewish versus anything more than so than any other religion.
I did like, however, the slide you showed, the challenge that you were drawing parallels and asking the 6th graders in the audience to find the match between Superman and Moses.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I do that all the time, where I just say that I'm going to tell a short story, and you tell me who I'm talking about, and I describe the baby being sent away by his parents and being found by another couple and being raised and not knowing his history and becoming a savior. And in most every audience, they say Moses first, which is really sweet. But then the story is identical to Superman. I mean, in those broad strokes,
right.
Same thing. So that's when people get in. Sometimes there have been 1 or 2 people that have been almost indignant to say, of course they based it on Moses. And I say, look, I know it looks like that, but they never said that. Mm-hmm. So we just don't know.
Right.
And it could have been subconscious. I mean, it could have been. I mean, they were no dummies, but it could have been subconscious.
Right.
Or it could have been just a complete coincidence. I don't know.
Interesting. So you mentioned very briefly the Batman book that you're working on. Tell more about that.
I have a book on Batman coming out in July of 2012. I consider it a companion book to Boys of Steel. It's the true story behind Batman. Superman's story I always liken to Davy and Goliath. It's about these 2 young guys who are against a big corporation, essentially, if you want to put it in very simplistic terms. 2 young men who came up with an idea that they sold to a company that then took all rights, and these young guys were left in the dust, basically, even though there were probably things they could have done to protect themselves. Essentially, they gave up a gold mine. And the Batman story is also 2 guys, but not against a big corporation. It's more like, instead of a Davy and Goliath story, it's more like a Cain and Abel story. It's almost brother versus brother, because one of the 2 was unscrupulous and took advantage of the other. And so my book is about the one who got taken advantage of, and his name was Bill Finger. He was the original writer. He was the designer of the costume. Even though he was the writer, he was the visual architect of Batman. So you stop a grandmother on the street who's never read a comic book and say, tell me one thing about Batman. She'll either talk about what he looks like, or probably mention, that he's got a partner named Robin, or that he lives in a cave, or that his main villain is the Joker. These are things that mainstream popular culture has caught up with. All that was Bill Finger. But Bob Kane took credit for all that. And in Bill's entire career, he never once saw his name on a first-run Batman story, and he died in 1974, penniless, unknown, no obituary, no funeral, completely bleak and depressing ending to this genius's life. And so I wrote a book to honor this man, and hopefully help him, even though he's long gone, get this legacy back in a more mainstream way. Comics people know him. In fact, he's considered the biggest martyr in comics history, I would say. But the general public doesn't know him. So I want that same chance like I gave Jerry and Joe with Boys of Steel.
Yeah. And you mentioned also Bill Finger and Bob Kane were also both Jewish?
Also both Jewish, yeah. Bob Kane's birth name was Robert Kahn. He changed it to Kane. And Bill Finger's birth name was not Bill Finger, and I can't say yet what it was because it was a key to me finding something very cool that's in the book. But it's addressed on the first page of the book, so and his Judaism as well.
Okay, so we'll look forward to finding out his secret identity.
Yeah, that is the theme of the book, actually, is secret identities.
Cool.
The theme of Boys of Steel was strength and the parallel between them and their creation. And the theme of the Batman book is secret identities, which is a very common theme in superheroes, obviously. But it plays out very interestingly with Bill Finger because he had more than one secret identity. Let's just put it that way.
Cool.
Yeah.
Intriguing.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back to one of the slides that you showed earlier today, which was about the creation of superheroes, that before Superman there were heroes, but they weren't really superheroes. So explain about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is there's no hard and fast definition, but what most people seem to say is that the superhero is a character who has powers or whether inside or technological. Like Batman has no power, but he has resources to have lots of cool stuff, gadgets that help him. So there's the powers, there's the secret identity, and there's a costume. So lots of characters before Superman had one or two of those things, but nobody had all of them. For example, Tarzan had power. He was able to communicate with gorillas, and he was almost superhuman in his agility and so forth, but he was born a human. Zorro had a secret identity, but no powers, and Zorro had a costume as well. So, and lots of Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon could be considered to have costumes, even though they were in the future. So maybe it's just their regular clothes. To us, it looks like a costume. But Superman synthesized all this, and that is why he is considered the first true superhero, because he was this new combination of these factors.
And then you said something else about why Superman is unique in
Yes.
terms of the stranger. Tell about
Yes. Well, that was something that I just wanted to be able to articulate more so in situations like this or speaking engagements, rather, because it's not addressed directly in the book. But what made Superman different? Because to a modern audience, you look at Superman, and he's one of an army of superheroes, and they all can do amazing things. And most people don't even know that he was the first, believe it or not. But what I found through other people's input as well is that one of the things that made him unique at the time was that he was a stranger in a familiar setting. Up until that point, most science fiction was about humans going to other planets where we were the strangers. Superman was an alien who came to Earth where he was the stranger, and not only that, but he was benevolent, because most of the alien stories, there weren't so many yet, but the ones that had come out already were about aliens that were out to conquer or be malicious in some way, and Superman was benevolent. So those were two factors that made him unique, and when something's unique, people pay attention.
What are you working on next?
Well, the Batman one is not out yet, so
Okay.
that's going to consume me for the next while, because even this far in advance of publication, 4 or 5 months, I'm already trying to plan out my speaking schedule and just building buzz with my blog and stuff that I probably do to excess if you look at me clinically. And then I have a couple of other picture books that are in various stages of development, nothing superhero related, but there's heroism in them. One that I'm hoping to get going the quickest is about a Japanese pilot from World War II. And I've actually blogged about this too. It's a little known story, but it's quite remarkable. And every time I tell it, it just makes people's jaws drop. And it's also very emotional. And it's like Boys of Steel in the sense that it's a gap. You won't find a book about this in a library, but when you do hear the story, you think, how could I have not heard this before? So that to me is so appealing as a writer, to tell these stories where I might be the first one actually doing this kind of research. I like to, with no love lost to Rosa Parks or Babe Ruth or Kennedy or any bold-faced name, I like to try to write about people that haven't gotten as much attention. Then I really feel like I might find something new, which I've done. So I'm excited for that.
So what's the hook? You didn't really describe the story.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Well, it's on my blog. I guess I can say it now. It's the story of the first and only time that somebody bombed the U.S. from a plane. Which at first, when you hear that, does not sound like appropriate fare for a children's book, but it's World War II, which they do study in school, fourth grade and up, and for my purposes, it actually works out that he didn't kill anybody. He dropped bombs in the forests of Oregon that did not even hurt anybody, and what makes it so beautiful is that, worth telling in this format, is that then 20 years after that, he was invited to the town as a gesture of peace. And this was really, really controversial in 1962 when there was still rampant racism toward the Japanese and so forth. And they developed a 30-year friendship, this man and this town. And there's so many beautiful aspects to it. I mean, and it involves all these things. When I throw them out there, it sounds like I'm writing a script. A plane launching off a submarine, a 400-year-old samurai sword, a Japanese man who doesn't speak English at a U.S. parade where he is preparing to gift this sword to the town, and if they don't accept it, he's going to do something traditionally Japanese, which is not pleasant, because he's so disrespected by, he feels so dishonored, not that they dishonored him, but he's dishonoring himself by not being worthy of acceptance and of apology. So there's this, and just the beautiful ending of this, where the town made him an honorary citizen and played a requiem on flute at the site of the bombing after he died and scattered his ashes. I mean, there's just so many beautiful lessons in this. And one of the things that this man said was that he wonders if, I mean, it's a very, very general comment, but he said, I wonder if the World War II would have been different if we had more multicultural awareness then. So one of the things that he did was he donated lots of multicultural books to this town's library, trying to educate young people about the dangers of not being tolerant of others. So it's just everything about the story for me works, and I've done it, of course, in a very appropriate way. And there's been plenty of other picture books about war, even about the Holocaust and things that are extremely difficult to talk about with young people. This book doesn't have that. So that's, for me, is not the deterrent, but so the hook is just, this is a guy who did something that no one else has ever done, and his dying wish was that no one ever do it again. So.
Wow. Your secret identity seems to be coming out, that you are the pursuer of justice for the underdog in writing about these little-known figures who deserve more attention.
Yeah, so. Well, I mean, I just write what appeals, and I hope that other people feel the same. So.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Heidi, for your time.
There are so many ways to connect with the Book of Life. Fan us at facebook.com/Book of Life Podcast. Follow us at twitter.com/bookoflifepod. Email us at bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 561-206-2473. You can also listen to the latest episode by phone at 916-313-3820. And, of course, find links to everything at bookoflifepodcast.com. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida, at cbiboca.org, and is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilach Makers Klezmer String Band at freilachmakers.com. Thanks for listening, and happy reading.